Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for gathering. We'd like to begin the round table. This session will be moderated by Ms. Nami Mizutori, the Special Representative of the United Nations, Secretary General for Disaster Reduction and Head of the United Nations Officer for Disaster Risk Reduction. I will now hand over to Ms. Mizutori.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So today, invited by the Governor of Tokyo, Ms. Yuriko Koike, we are going to discuss a very important issue of disaster risk reduction. As the Governor mentioned this morning, 4 years ago in the city of Sendai, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was adopted. And the paradigm shift enshrined in this document, adopted by all member states of the United Nations, is that we need to move from managing disasters to managing disaster risk, prevent and build resilience. If we don't succeed in doing this, we will not be able to break the vicious circle of disaster response and relief. And as we also heard this morning, the cities are at the front line of this challenge. It's the mayors, it's the governors who bear the brunt and who need to respond to their people and who need to prevent. We heard also how rapidly the urban area of the world is growing. And also the nature of risk that we are facing these days is systemic. One crisis after another, so there's a multi-hazard risk that we need to deal with. And in order to do this, we need to work in partnership. We need to learn from each other. And today is a brilliant opportunity for such an occasion. And I'm sure that we will hear from many of your challenges, many of your lessons learned, and the best practices. And I'd like to, first of all, turn to our gracious host, Ms. Koike, to learn from Ms. Koike, as Governor of Tokyo, what is she doing in order to build the resilience of Tokyo? Ms. Koike, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to Tokyo. And I'm the Governor of Tokyo, Yuriko Koike. I'd like to welcome all of you here to Tokyo to discuss and share the common agenda, how to secure each cities and prefectures and the states. Thank you for the introduction, and I would like to talk about our experience and what we are doing in order to secure the great capital of Japan, Tokyo. Now, about 20% of the world's earthquake of magnitude 6 or higher strike in Japan. As shown here, Tokyo was hit by the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923. Now, almost 100 years later, experts predict a 70% risk that another large earthquake will strike our city within the next 30 years. It is said so since almost 8 years. Anyway, alongside earthquakes, typhoons, and torrential rains like today are increasing in frequency due to climate change. Now, Tokyo emphasizes support in 3 areas. 1, kojo, 2, jijo, and 3, kyojo. Kojo means, jo means assistance or support. Kojo meaning public assistance. And jijo meaning self-help. And kyojo meaning mutual help. Public assistance means physical measures taken by the authorities in times of disaster, and self-help involves people protecting themselves. And mutual help refers to residents helping each other. Let me first address public assistance. Tokyo is accelerating steps to earthquake-proof infrastructure, such as buildings, water and sewer facilities, and pipes. To take measures against flooding, We are building underground reservoirs beneath roads and parks to capture excess water from rivers and sewers, as you are watching at yes, this shows how big it is. These reservoirs are capable of retaining some of the flood water, thereby ensuring the safety of areas downstream. Moreover, we are strengthening our system of levees and floodgates to protect the city from tsunamis and storm surges. Next, I'd like to talk about self-help and mutual help. It is vital for our city to encourage people to rethink about what to do in a disaster. When a disaster hits, we must also get accurate information out quickly. I experienced the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake in 1995, and at that time, the rescue rates from self-help and mutual help were far higher than those from official rescue teams and other public assistance. This made people realize the importance of self-help and mutual help. After the March 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, transportation networks in Tokyo were paralyzed and there were shortages of food and necessities. This again underscored the importance of preparedness. In response, we have distributed a booklet that summarizes important information such as the need to stockpile water and food rations to all Tokyo households. A separate booklet has also been published focusing on women's perspectives in disaster preparedness and management, this pink one. Moreover, there is an initiative called My Timeline, which encourages people to create personal action plans for evacuations using a simple timeline planning kit. This blue one. And this will ensure that they are not left behind. We also make use of digital tools. Personally, I like the Tokyo Amesh website, which provides frequently updated disaster preparedness information, including real-time rainfall mapping. As a matter of fact, before I'm coming here, I checked this up, whether our reception tonight will be good and under the good weather or not. But don't worry, the rainfall will stop by 4 o'clock or someone. Now, disaster preparedness information is also available by our smartphone app so that people can access it anytime, anywhere, and to ensure the safety of foreign residents and the millions of visitors we welcome every year, not to mention the many visitors we look forward to hosting during the 2020 Games. This smartphone app is available in multiple languages alongside information published on Twitter and other outlets. I place great value in the Girl Scouts motto. Can you imagine? I was a member of the Girl Scout when I was a child. And the motto, do you know that? Be prepared. This is a very important word. And I was Minister of Defense. So even for the national security, be prepared is a key word to secure the country and people. So it is my hope that we can learn from each other and help each other make our respective cities safer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koike. The 3 levels of assistance support that you are putting in, public, mutual, and self-help, is something that we can all learn from in order to really leave no one behind. And we can see how much you are doing preparing for the very important 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Now, before introducing our next presenter, I'd like to also mention that today in addition to these 8 presentations, we have the political leaders from the following cities with us today, which are Bangkok, Buenos Aires, Durban, Mexico City, New Orleans, Santiago, Tirana, Ulaanbaatar, and Wellington. And I'd also like to kindly request to the presentators if they could keep their presentation within the allocated 5 minutes as much as possible so that we can have a vibrant exchange afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Mayor of Christchurch, Ms. Leanne Dalgill, to give her presentation. Ms. Dalgill.
Kia ora koutou katoa, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I acknowledge the Tokyo government for this wonderful opportunity to come together and share our experiences. I'm very pleased to be representing Christchurch, New Zealand, a city that's had more than its fair share of challenges. We had the Canterbury earthquake sequence of 2010, 2011, urban flooding, a major fire, and most recently a terrorist attack which resulted in 51 members of our Muslim communities killed. In addition, we are a low-lying coastal city, and that means that we need to plan and prepare for the impacts of climate change. In each and every one of these scenarios, past, present, and future, there is an essential ingredient to response and recovery that often gets missed in the standardised response, and that is that each and every one of the Sendai the framework's priorities require communities to be fully engaged at every level, from understanding risk all the way through to enhancing preparedness for effective response and recovery. Therefore, there is a need to ensure the active participation of communities in response and recovery planning before disaster strikes, and to ensure communities have the tools they need for adaptive land use planning for the future. Cities are coming together around the world to coalesce around important issues, as we've already seen today with the U20, with work focused on climate change, social inclusion and integration, adaptive planning and sustainable economic growth. These networks emphasise the importance of the role of the city in terms of responding to these issues, but actually being close enough to the people to be making a difference in that regard. Having served in central government for many years and now as a city mayor, it is at the city level and the town level that we can best plan and prepare for whatever arises in the future. I remember the day when I realised that community development, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, health promotion, and sustainable economic development are all the same. They're all wrapped up in the framework of resilience, and it has the community always at the centre, no matter which one of those topics you're considering. That's why I was so keen for our city to become part of one of these networks, in this case the 100 Resilient Cities Network pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation. It should be no surprise that the communities that recovered most quickly after the earthquakes were those who were already connected and who had the capacity to do things for themselves. Widespread community-led responses played an important role in supporting Christchurch immediately following the earthquakes and during the ensuing period of recovery. Responses included informal, spontaneous efforts like the youth-led student volunteer army formed by local university students. This has now become a movement and lives on today as the most popular club on campus, with students undertaking volunteer work in the community. But when disaster strikes overseas, they go over and help young people to mobilise, as they have done in many countries around the world who have experienced disaster. However, it was in the communities that already had networks in place, like time banks, community gardens, where communities already know each other and were used to coming together to make their community a better place. It was these communities who thrived in the post-disaster environment. In essence, they had high levels of social capital and were ready to invest in their own recovery. It is the culture of community connectedness or social culture capital that builds resilience for the shocks and stresses that are part of an uncertain future. In today's world, where trust can be a fragile thing, as well as very difficult to build in a time of crisis, we need to have formed a connection with those trusted networks before anything arises. We can usually rely on the honeymoon period of people coming together after a crisis, like our Share an Idea campaign pictured here, and which attracted thousands of ideas for reimagining our Central City business district. But it is good to remember that honeymoons are soon over. At the same time, it is difficult to build community connections before a crisis hits if the members of that community feel isolated and alone. The same is true when communities feel they cannot influence decisions and that they are somehow forgotten or left behind. The internet has made communication more available, and yet we can feel even more disconnected than ever, more lonely and more alone. At the same time, the ability to spread hate and division through a virtual community gives a platform for extremist views, and we sadly now know where this ends. Resilient communities are the antidote to these emerging challenges. We know and trust each other. So when it comes to the role of city leaders, it is important to remember that building resilient communities is not something that governments can do for communities, but neither is it something that communities can do as well on their own. We need to see our role as facilitating and enabling community connectedness and the ability to participate in city decision-making. A community network that was formed in the aftermath of the earthquakes had a motto which said, "The wisdom of the community always exceeds the knowledge of the experts." Remembering that resilience, though, cannot be a top-down exercise alone, my motto would be that the wisdom of the community, when combined with the knowledge of the experts, always exceeds what one can offer without the other. And I think that is a really important message for all of us to have as City, and that's why trust is the essential ingredient of resilience, and that is a universal truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dalgill. As you mentioned, climate change, its frequency and intensity is increasing, and it is really impacting on the disaster and the jobs of the leaders. And as you say, connecting people and community is definitely one of the foundations of tackling this difficult issue. So I would now like to ask the Mayor of Rotterdam, Mr. Hamid, it is a second speaker is the Governor of Jakarta, Mr. Anies Baswedan. Sorry about that. My apologies. Governor, may I ask you to take the floor?
First of all, allow me again to thank Governor Koike for a warm welcome and well-organized U20 meetings. And appreciate the opportunity to share. Our names is the same first letter. And in fact, we face somewhat similar challenges. I will later on explain a little bit. Jakarta, as a capital city of Indonesia. Oh.
May I ask for a moment? I think we have the wrong slide. Perhaps. Is this yours?
No, this is not mine.
This is not yours.
Doesn't look like Jakarta.
No. So.
I think it's not my slides.
May I ask the organizers to exchange the slides for the governor of Jakarta? Thank you for your patience,
Yeah,
Excellency.
no problem. But as we wait, allow me to just explain that Jakarta is located in the northern coastal of Java Island. Java Island is perhaps one of the most populated islands in the world. And Jakarta, located in the north side, we are confronted with various different natural disaster challenges. I will mention a few. Is this the... Yeah, okay, it's done.
Yeah?
Done. Yes. So disaster risk in Jakarta, we have quite a few. There's river flood, flash flood. We have coastal flood, we have epidemic, and then social uneasiness sometimes happen, earthquakes. It doesn't really happen in Jakarta, but surrounding Jakarta is risky for earthquake, and then settlement fire. But at this opportunity, I would like to focus more on the flood issues, as others has been discussed earlier. And let me give you a map of Jakarta. This is a flood map since 2015. Oh, it's gone. No, we'd like to see the video. Please let the video to play, because it is a profile of our maps with regard to flood issues. What I'm trying to show here is that over time, as you see the red one, those are the area in which we're experiencing flood. In the past, we have quite a few areas in which we have flood. Nowadays, we're dealing more on the river banks. So given these pictures, I would like to invite your attentions to our challenges. Yeah, you can end it there. So Jakarta is confronted with three fronts of flood problems. One is we are in the coastal area, and south of us is highlands. Whenever there is heavy rains in the highlands, then Jakarta need to be prepared. We have 13 rivers coming into our city. So you can imagine when there is heavy rain in the highlands, then even Jakarta is dry, we could have flood because of water coming in from the highland. That's one front that we're dealing with. The second front is on the coastal area. Jakarta is experiencing land subsidence at the rate that is actually unacceptable. In the past 2 decades, we have experienced around 4 meters of land subsidence. So about average 20 centimeters per year. That is rather significant, meaning we are building, as the previous pictures have shown you, this like a dam in the coastal area to prevent the water from the sea coming into the city. So when we are talking about climate change, for us, the impact is very obvious. If the sea level rises, then we are experiencing challenge. Now imagine when 2 things happening at the same time. In the highland, we have heavy rains. On the seas, we have rising sea level. Then Jakarta is confronting 2 challenges at the same time. And then the third one is rains happening in Jakarta. Almost 90% of our land is covered by building, roads, including residentials. So you can imagine when we have rain, it means vertical drainage is minimum. Given those challenges, these are our approach. Number one, on the highlands, we are working with the central government to build reservoirs, dam, upstreams, long before the river approaching the city. And we are completing those dams. It will be historic because the first 2 big dams is in the completions. Once that is completed, we're able to reduce about 30% of water coming in to the city. And that can be a very significant number. That's number one, in the upstream. The second is along the river itself. As I mentioned earlier, we have 13 rivers. We are inviting NGOs, grassroots movement, communities to participate in what we call naturalizations of our rivers. We created rivers that able to serve as reservoir as well. And this naturalizations of river is massive, and we have been doing that in the past year and a half, and we hope to see the result quickly. In the past season, we have seen very minimum flooded coming into Jakarta. So hopefully that's a good sign. It will continue. The third aspect is we're building more than 100 parks. And the park is next to the river. And the idea is during flood times, this can serve as retention pools so that we can hopefully slow down the speed of water coming in to the city. And we are building 100 plus across the city. And in the dry season, this simply serve as regular park. But during rainy season, this serve as a reservoir for waters. And then on top of that, we are inviting university students, university professors, NGO, grassroots movement activists to participate in building awareness of our people, especially along the river banks, because those are the area in which the risk is high. And preparedness is truly there. Just last month, we had a small flood coming in, but it shows the degree of preparedness that we could be very proud of. Whenever we found that in the highland, the red code is being sent to Jakarta, meaning the water level is high. It was 11 o'clock at night. We alerted every communities along the riverbanks. And what happened was everyone involved in preparing, and then we have seen almost no significant damage to the people in that area because of the responsiveness of the community in tackling preparedness in facing those water coming in from the highland. So those are some of our approach in dealing with the water coming in from the highland. The second is with regard to water coming into Jakarta from the rain. We are building vertical drainage system to make sure that zero runoff is in every building and every house. We're giving a tax incentive for houses that build vertical drainage. It's like a well in which you harvest the rain and then drain it directly to the soil, so that there is the policy of zero runoff is being taken. And by doing that, we plan to start building 1.8 million vertical drainage across the city. And that vertical drainage is like a well. The deep is about 6 to 12 meters, and the diameter is about 60 centimeters to 1.2 meters. And the idea is to make sure water is not being drained to the river, but vertically drained to our soil. That is our second approach, and that is taking place in Jakarta. The last one, with regard to the sea level, the dam we're building along the coastal area is under construction. We're completing that. Once that is finished, then we hope to be able to tackle the high sea level that is often arising because of the climate change. And with that, we are pretty sure that some of our challenge could be taken care of, and the flood issues that Jakarta has been experiencing in the past few decades can be, hopefully can be part of our history, not part of our future. And we hope that in the future, all of this approach, stronger collaborations, and we plan our city based on hazard risks and simulations on preparedness for disasters is being done, and hopefully that area, especially park along the rivers, can serve as also for leisure, education, and entertainment, beside to prevent flood. So those are our approach, and we are happy as so far so good, and hopefully in the years to come, we will be able to say that flood is no longer part of our story, but part of our history. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor Baswedan. Hazard maps are indeed important to understand the risk that one is facing. And of course, most of the important cities in the world, they are graced with the presence of wonderful rivers, but at the same time, controlling the rivers is a big challenge for many of these cities. I would now like to turn to the Vice Chairman of Hanoi City, Mr. Nguyen Van Suye, for his presentation. You have the floor, Mr. Nguyen Van Suye.
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, Hà Nội rất là vui mừng tham dự cái diễn đàn.
Participants, dear guests, today I am so honored to be part of this particular forum. 3 days ago, Hanoi's temperature hit 41 degrees C. This is perhaps another challenge of climate change to Hanoi. And Hanoi's area is 3,340 square kilometers, and it is occupied by more than 10 million populations, and it has 2 main rivers, and including the tributaries, 10 major rivers running into Hanoi. It has a lot of dikes and levees. In 1971, we had the worst of kind of flood, and 10 years ago, 2008, we had another historically heavy rain hitting the city. Hanoi City was totally under the water. Maybe the water height was 3 to 4 meters, and the damage was 3 trillion dong, the local currency. Hanoi has a lot of challenge. For example, one of the worst case scenario would be the breakdown of the levees and dikes, and also the water source pollution by chemical substances and industrial wastes. Pollution is another risk. Another is building fires, explosions, and collapse. In the old Hanoi, it has many old apartments and buildings, and they are nearing the risk of collapse. Hanoi's preparedness plan has been initiated, and also national standards for disaster preparedness has been worked upon, and technology transfer is another approach for management and control, and we would like to respond quickly. And this is our future policies and the plans. One, early warning and alert initiated by the administrative authorities. At the same time, when the disaster hits, preparedness infrastructure should be enhanced, including Hanoi. The Vietnam has 4 local, we'll say, rules. And communities and people's awareness is enhanced against disasters. And we continue to introduce new technologies to combat the disasters. And this is one of the good example. International cooperation is what we would like to be part of. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nguyen Van Suye. The multi-hazards that your city is facing reminds us that it is not only natural hazards such as floods and torrential rain, but also the man-made hazards such as fire, pollution, water, air, that we are all facing today. And in tackling then the importance that you mentioned about introducing science and technology is something that we all need to look into, and definitely early warning systems. And finally, yes, international cooperation, increasing it is one of the targets of the Sendai framework. So thank you very much for reminding us of all those aspects. Now, I would like to invite the first Deputy Mayor of Paris, Mr. Emmanuel Grégoire, to give his presentation. Ms. Grégoire, the floor is yours.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, dear Governor Kwake, thank you very much for your welcome in Tokyo. I'm here today and I'm going to tell you some information about Paris' first resilience strategy, which was voted in September 2017, now under implementation. This framework for urban development is innovative in many ways, and especially because it proposes an holistic and systemic approach to design public policies among the administrative and technical silos of local governments. So what are we talking about? What does mean resilience, which is quite a buzzword at the moment? At first, we're not talking about the resilience of the city hall or the local authority. We're talking about the resilience of the territory as a whole, including everything, its institutions, its businesses, its inhabitants, its built infrastructures, buildings, roads, bridges, its natural infrastructures, resources, rivers, forests, parks, etc., its critical networks and their flows of energy, people, communication. It is the city seen as a urban metabolism, as a system of interrelated systems. And we envision the ability of this urban metabolism to keep on functioning and developing no matter what's going to happen in the century. Cities must be stronger to face shocks and catastrophes like flooding, earthquakes, terrorist attacks, pandemics, and so on. But in the same time, with the same policies, cities must mitigate or address chronic stresses like social inequalities, air, water, and air and soil pollutions, scarcity of resources, migration, and so on. So I mentioned 6 challenges that we can identify or anticipate, but a resilient territory is a territory ready to face the unexpected as well because it's flexible, redundant, and integrated enough. Some qualities that are not the first one to come in mind when we're talking about public administration. So there is a lot to do, but actually that's not that complicated. These different qualities of a resilient system help us to resist to accurate shocks and chronic stresses. Integrated, all systems work together. Inclusive, large participation of all stakeholders. Robust, it means mitigate failures. Redundant, backup capabilities. Reflective, ability to learn. Flexible, capacity to define alternative strategies. And resourceful, it means adapted resources allocation. Of course, resilience is not a real new concept. Some of you may be looking for more examples of acute shocks and chronic stresses. And perhaps Paris' motto is a perfect definition of resilience. Fluctuat nec mergitur. It's a Latin expression which means it floats but does not sink. Because the symbol of the city of Paris is a boat, just to explain a little more. In Paris, here are the main 6 resilient challenges we have been aiming to address with this strategy. The first one, and probably the most important one, social inequalities and exclusion. At first, inequality, exclusion, and lack of social cohesion, in fact. This challenge is shared by most of the resilient cities in the world, everywhere. In Paris, homelessness increased by 84% within the past 15 years, despite the fact that the city is one of the most ambitious in the world regarding social policies. We spend 2.5 billion a year. And social cohesion is a key of resilience. The more cohesive is a community, the more cohesive is a community, the more resilient it is to face any kind of shock or stress. Of course, terrorist attacks and security, which strikes a lot of our cities. Of course, risk related to the Seine river and water. Of course, the risk of flooding, but not only, because in the same time, we might face more exceptional floodings because of climate change. We are also going to face more and more droughts in the watershed with a decrease of more than 30% of the lowest level of the river. Of course, air pollution, of course, climate change. The question of the governance is very important. Paris won't be able to tackle alone these huge challenges, and we need new cooperations with other territories around, including the countryside, new cooperations with the private sector, with academia, with inhabitants, and with NGOs. It's a shared vision. Paris relies on its residents, adapts its infrastructure, mobilizes its collective intelligence and the territory that surround it to turn the challenges to the country. The more important is just to be confident in the future. Just to say that the world is going to, with the huge changes that the world is going to face, and even if the national governments are turning to other direction, local authorities, cities, their mayors, their elected officials, their civil servants and administrations are here to find concrete and positive solutions for and with the people to tackle the main century's challenges, and that we shouldn't be afraid of the future. Thank you very much. Arigato.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire. And you have very eloquently unpacked the elements of resilience. What does it actually mean? And the point that you made about the need to cooperate with all stakeholders is absolutely the case. And actually, the Sendai framework explicitly says that implementing the framework in achieving disaster risk reduction is the responsibility of everyone. So we must all work together. So now I would like to invite the Mayor of Rotterdam, Mr. Ahmed Aboutaleb. Mr. Aboutaleb, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Korke, thank you for your invitation. And thank you for providing us with a book. Because if there is a major flooding, all telecommunication lines will be cut off. So it's nice to have in your toilets a book to read what to do in times of crisis. It's there where we have our crisis books in the Netherlands, in the toilets. As a kind of a refugee place in your own home. And it's nice to be among friends that we are collaborating with for many years now. Governor Baswedan from Jakarta, we are paired with his city for long than 10, 15 years, working together in terms of water management. And we do the same with Vietnam, another city, Ho Chi Minh City. It's not available, not here today, but we're working with that city for many years. Why? Because Rotterdam experiences the dangers of water. Indeed, if the snow is melting in French Alps or in Switzerland, we have flooding. And if there is rain, we have flooding. And the word Netherlands means low-lying country. And parts of my city are that low as -6 meters. That's higher than this building. Can you imagine you walk on the dike, here's the water, and down there, -6 meters, the buildings and the cows and the vegetables and the farmers. That's the Netherlands. City Hall of Rotterdam is -2 meters. So we have to deal with water. And we have no other choice than being good, being excellent, approximately 9.5 on a scale of 10, because 10 is for God, we say, being very excellent in prevention. That's all. So we built solid dikes for many years, most beautiful stone dikes in the world, I should say, built to resist a huge amount of water. And for that reason, we founded the first democracy in the Netherlands, the water boards, to be elected in the 16th century, and to impose dedicated taxes on citizens. Every household in Rotterdam is paying approximately 400 euros a year, dedicated taxation for this water board to build the infrastructure, to keep the water, and as we say in Dutch, to keep our feet dry. So you may see on the River de Maas, a huge arm closing the river when there is high risk of flooding coming from the North Sea. So the Netherlands has a major infrastructure to do that. We built water plazas. We invested even outside the city of Rotterdam in a rowing lane with Olympic dimensions to keep the water. And similar to the system of Tokyo, and I had the honor to visit your underground system. I have wonderful pictures of that. We have underground storage facilities to keep the water in the city in times of rain, and then when the river level is sinking, we pump the water into the river. So the future will be, of course, building an adaptive city. We cannot resist the water always, but we have to learn to live with water. The water is a dimension you simply cannot resist if it's coming in huge volumes. It can cause power cut, a cut of all telecommunication lines. All data systems we have in the Netherlands are underground. We should stop having our electricity connections on the first floor. It must be on the top floor. That's a major change in thinking about construction buildings. And we have to continue to invest in water management. I have been chairing last 5-6 years a regional body to conduct a study whether our dikes and levees are still good enough. Well, most of them are good, not all of them. That requires an investment of 1 billion euros a year. 1 billion euros a year to a volume of 100 million in 100 years. It's a huge amount of money. The second risk, the port of Rotterdam is constructed on the river. But if there is an explosion, we have one of the largest petrochemical sites in the world, 5 major refineries, how to deal with that. So that's another risk, dealing with petrochemical sites and the risks of explosions. And then there is terrorism. The Vice Mayor of Paris is talking about that. We're also preparing for terrorism. If that happens, what is the governance tool? Facing this type of issues in the law is given to the mayors. And the mayor of Rotterdam is also responsible for the entire region if something happens over there in physical terms. So I might take it over from another mayor in the city, in the region, up to the 16 cities surrounding the city of Rotterdam. But when it comes to terrorism, then suddenly the Minister of Justice is responsible. But what happens with my position as mayor is the minister thinking that he can push me away from my responsibility to take care of my citizens. It's not going to happen. So collaboration between the mayor and the minister is a very fascinating theme to collaborate in terms of terrorism. And then all that need to be financed. Only in my city, we have a budget of 130 million euros a year, 130 million euros a year, and a staff of 2,000 people. That is a permanent staff to deal with disaster management, to be prepared, including the fire departments, the ambulances, and also to keep a number of beds available in the city, in hospitals, in case of any dramatic explosion or such an event like we're talking about. That is the volume of 200 beds every day, 200 empty beds in hospitals in the city to deal with the risks as we are talking about if something happens. And of course, resiliency is more than that. It's dealing with social issues, inequalities like the Vice Mayor of Paris are talking about, preventing riots as it happens sometimes if people are feeling not to be treated well in the growing economies. So I think there's more to say about that, and I'm really confident that learning from each other and exchanging our experiences here will help us to deal with preparing for any disaster, including a good book in the toilet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdaleb. Historically, as you have mentioned, Netherlands has been one of the most well-prepared countries in terms of disasters risk. But one important thing that you have shown us is that we need to invest in resilience. We need to allocate budget, and we need to put that into specific measures. But in order to do that, as you mentioned, the citizens have to understand that part of their tax needs to be used for that, and that is precisely the fact many cities lack financing for disaster risk reduction, and that, I think, is a crucial element of what the cities have to do. Thank you very much. So now I would like to turn to the Vice Mayor of Seoul, Mr. Ji Hin-sun, who will give his presentation. Mr. Ji Hin-sun, the floor is yours.
Everyone, hello. I am Jin Hee-sun, Vice Mayor of Seoul Metropolitan Government. Before we begin, I must say I am very much honored to stand before mayors, governors, and leaders of cities around the world to address this Resilience Forum. Let me introduce that Seoul government is push forward smart, safe city Seoul. Seoul, the capital of Republic of Korea, is mega city and home to 10 million people. Not only its large number of people, but city infrastructure, including 610,000 buildings, 500 bridges, and 350-kilometer long subway train, also densely populated in Seoul. In 1950, almost of the Seoul infrastructure were reduced to rubble due to the Korean War. Through the rebuilding process after the Korean War, however, Seoul achieved rapid economic growth through industrialization and urbanization. 70% of Seoul infrastructure were constructed during the short period of economic miracle in 70s and 80s. Seoul has now become one of the world's major cities. However, we also faced challenge from the compact economic growth. Seoul infrastructure, which was constructed during the 70s and 80s, is now deteriorates. In 1994, Songsu Bridge across the Han River collapsed. Also, since 2010, sunken roads and sinkhole have been the frequent within city, emerging as safe concerns. Recently, abnormal weather conditions due to climate change introduced natural disasters, including floods and landfalls. In 2011, the heavy rainfall swamped the city of Seoul, left a great number of the casualties. 3 days long rainfall amounts to 40% of city average annual rainfall, and the results of flash flood in Gangnam Station area, and the landslides in Mountain Woman. In order to anticipate the prevent such accidents, Seoul plans to utilize IoT, big data analysis, and robotics to create a smart, safe city. Let me say some example of smart, safe city projects by Seoul government. First of all, we plan to take preemptive measures to manage our aging infrastructure through big data analysis system. Recovery costs are tremendous for roads, railroads, and other infrastructure in face of the emergency. By analyzing big data and predict defects on the old infrastructure, we will able to lower maintenance cost and prolong the life of structure. To briefly give you idea of system, we've first establish a database from collected data and calculate best time for repairs and renovations through big data analysis. Also, Seoul government has actually adapted the smart technology in order to prevent any possible infrastructure failure. First, we are operating a real-time bridge and tunnel monitoring center. Sensors and cameras are installed on and within bridges and tunnels to detect any sign of emergency. The collected data will be able to send to Emergency Operations Center for real time. This information is directly linked to the digital mayor office and to open the public on the internet. Second, the 3D ground penetrates radar equipment which is installed on the vehicle allow us to look through underground facilities pipes very efficiently. The third is remote tension monitoring system. An optical fiber sense is inserted inside a steel wire of bridge piers. So in case of any fracture, warning signal will be transmitted. By doing so, we will be able to assess the safety of bridge piers and prevent any failure bridge. Finally, Seoul has implemented smart flood prevention system. We incorporate advanced rainfall forecast technology based on high prevention floodgate radar. This enables us to anticipate regional heavy rainfall and to identify high-risk flood zone beforehand. Then, the identified areas through their sewage and flood pump station will be able to quickly drain rainwater in rapid manners. City-to-city cooperation is essential in disaster preparedness against a cross-border issue. Seoul will be put our most efforts in ensuring our practice and building cooperation with other cities around the world to create smart, safe city for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jin Hee-son. The issue of aging infrastructure is something that all of our cities are facing. And the example from Seoul on using data and technology in order to tackle these risks of aging infrastructure, in order to make your city safe and at the same time smart, is again a very good example that we can learn from. And indeed, city-to-city cooperation is vital. So now I would like to introduce our last presenter, the Deputy Mayor of the city of Tashkent, Mr. Shuhrat Tilduglov, and I understand that the presentation will be done by the leading specialist of the Tashkent municipality, Mr. Yustabes Elkinov.
Thank you very much. The governors, mayors, vice mayors, allow me to bring your attention the presentation of the activities of the Office of Emergency Situations of the city of Tashkent. To reduce the risk of industrial and natural disasters, in order to create an effective protection of the population and objects from natural disasters, by the decree of the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan on March 4, 1996, the Ministry of Emergency Situations and its territorial branches were established. It should be noted that the Office of the Emergency Situation is a special authorized local government body that manages and coordinates work of the field of emergency situations caused by natural disasters, accidents, or catastrophes in the territory of Tashkent city. The most urgent emergencies of the city of the Tashkent, based on the analysis done, are by the natural, for example, earthquakes and poisoning by toxic and other substances, and the man-made accidents, fires, explosions, flashes, the collapse of buildings, structure or accidents on the waters or fluid. Dear participants, on the slide that you are currently observing the information of the last 5 years from the 2014 and 2018 of emergency situations of the natural and man-natural occurred in the territory of Tashkent. We will see this. About the monitoring and determining threat. Speaking of emergency situations caused with an earthquake, especially in the territory of the Tashkent city, in phase and does not the accent an epicenter, but there are a couple of the strong fluctuations in the from, and the epicenter is located a few hundred kilometers from the city of Tashkent. Considering emergency situations associated with toxic poisoning and other substances, I would like to draw attention to the fact that they were mainly due by the violations of the rules of operating of heating systems and violations of the structures of the exhaust pipes, for example. Another example of the poisoning of the people is the consumption of the home preserved foods that were made in a violation of canning technologies or by the natural gas, some examples for. And another one, for example, emergencies associated with the accidents, unfortunately, on our roads. It's still possible to observe from individual drivers as disregarded of the speed limit or ignoring signs regulating traffic, as a result of which most of the accidents occur on the roads of Tashkent. For another one, emergency situations associated with fires in the city of Tashkent took places of residential buildings and in the places of the public gathering. Speaking of fires in the residential buildings, it can be noted by the occurred as a result of outstanding cigarette or the violation of the rules for operating gas or gasoline equipment. With the record of the collapse of buildings and structures for the emergencies of the types occurred mainly of a private new buildings when the builders made mistakes in the construction of the building elements. You can also observe information about the results of these emergencies by the pictures. As you know, a special place of the preservation of life and health of the population in emergency situations is occurred by the preparation of governing bodies and the training of large sections of the population. For example, workers, office workers, people, students, residents of communities, or for including with women, children, and the elderly. Another one, systematically throughout the year, classes are constructed of the facilities and the so-called mahallas. We've got some special societies, as well as in all educational institutions of the city according to the program of basic life safety with the methods of integrating into basic subjects. In order to consolidate the theoretical knowledge obtained on the field, practical comment and the staff past are held and special tactical exercises. Why we focus on the earthquakes? Because you all know that the earthquakes in the planetary threat with the worst consequences. Unfortunately, most of the territory of Republic of Uzbekistan, especially from Tashkent city, in which the vast majority of our population lives, including the city center, is subject to earthquakes, and the work in the program contributes to the training for young people, to actions and condition of destructive earthquakes. There's the one, there's the pictures. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elkinov. Your presentation highlighted the issue of the importance of safe schools, the importance of exercise drills, and you also highlighted the role that youth are playing, as did the mayor of Christchurch, the role of youth in disaster risk management, which is very important indeed. Now, because our presentators have all been wonderful in keeping to their time, while giving us such rich presentations, we do have actually quite a lot of time to exchange views. It's 4:10 right now, we have like 40 minutes. I would just mention that two of our presentators mentioned about terrorism. Now, Sendai Framework does not include the word violence, conflict. However, the reality of many cities and many countries is that disaster is striking in this, what we call the fragile context. So this is something that, and of course, the mayor of Christchurch mentioned that as well. So this is something that we need to understand as the reality. The presence of the deputy mayor of Paris reminds us of that terrible fire of Notre Dame, and that also highlights the importance of the cities in protecting their cultural heritage from disasters, which is, again, an increasingly difficult, important issue for many cities. Now, I'd like to open the floor for comments and questions. I'm happy that everyone asked questions to each other or comments on each other's presentations. Some questions that came to my mind are how can we increase more effective cooperation between cities? Because there were many of you who mentioned that peer-to-peer learning is important. How can we do it even more in an effective way? One thing that we always think is that, of course, cities can learn from each other, but what is the relationship between the national government and the cities? Do you feel that you are getting enough support from your national governments in terms? Now, many of the cities are so large that there may not need national support, but I think the connection is important. How do we finance disaster risk? Because, as I mentioned, when we ask mayors, what is your biggest challenge? The mayors say that, okay, it's the lack of funding. We want to do something, but we can't. So how can we how can we close this gap? And then finally, education advocacy is important, and what are we doing in terms of advocating to our citizens so that they can, as the governor of Tokyo mentioned, help themselves at the end of the day. I'd like to first turn to the Ms. Koike for Ms. Koike's comments and any questions you may have to other presentators. Ms. Koike, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much for your presentations. And I understand that the disaster risks we face as cities are myriad and so different for each city. Yet I was moved by the impassioned desire from the assembled city mayors to make efforts in strengthening their resilience infrastructure and above all else, protecting the people of their cities through urban management. And talking about the disasters, there are so, as I mentioned, it's myriad and different from the earthquakes and flooding and the climate change and sea level rise. So the preparedness, of course, are different from each other, but to prepare in advance is so important because it is more costly after the disaster occurred. Well, people's lives will be taken, and to make a recovery, it costs maybe 10 times more than making preparation. So what we have to do is to prepare. Well, for us, for Japan, we have daily earthquake, big words, trifle. And today we have cats and dog rain, for instance, and I'm checking how the rivers will be flooded or not, and this kind of thing. And so it costs a lot, but it is much better to pay for the for how can I say, for the rainy days. But in order to do so, to raise the people's awareness, I mean, people means taxpayers' awareness is really important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koike, for that very important point that it is costly to prepare, but at the end of the day, it is cheaper, it saves. If you only respond, you are actually paying out much. Resilience pays. Resilience is important. You mentioned 10 times. There are many, as you said, studies about how much putting $1 in prevention will actually save you money. I think 10 is one figure that we know, but it is absolutely true. And you mentioned about the myriad risks of difference, but also in one city, you also have myriad risks. You face natural disasters, and you also have man-made disaster, and sometimes you have a combination of the two. So it is becoming such a big challenge for all the political leaders. So now I would like to again open this to the floor, and any of the honorable leaders, if you have any intervention, please, can you let me know so that I can give you the floor? Yes, please.
Yes, and indeed, the challenges are different. And sometimes when these disasters come together, like a high water flooding in Rotterdam leading to contamination of a refinery, then you have a double disaster. It's chemicals getting into the water and the city that is flooding. Unfortunate, in my period, it doesn't happen. But we have a sophisticated high water warning that is coming in when we see melting water in France and in Switzerland. Then we have a high warning. We see the water coming 3-4 days in advance. So it's there where we can prepare for measures. You see, the issue of water, that's my experience last 10 years, it's not a sexy theme in my city. It's never an election item. Nobody discusses that into campaigns leading to elections. It's always about social economic issues, or it's about healthcare, or income divisions, or whatever, but never water. Knowing that that is the most important risk of the city. When I visit eastern part of the city, talking to the elderly living there, and I tell them, you are living in the most unsafe part of the city, then they think about crime, not about water. So knowing that they are living -6 meters, they take it for granted. Why? Because they know we have good dikes and levees. But it's not a good behavior. They should be aware that they have a danger over there. And if something happens, we cannot evacuate anyone. Mathematically, the evacuation fraction in Rotterdam is 15%. That means if something happens, we may evacuate 15% of citizens. In the trainings that we conduct, I never dare to train in evacuations, because if you train in that, you may cause casualties. So we don't do that. But so the only thing that we can prepare is tell people in a good book, climb in a high building, a building that is at least 6 meters. So it's training, it's also capacity building, but it's also the mindset of our citizens. In politics, if there is a shooting in the city, in a bar or whatever, for sure I know the council will request me to come to the council on Thursday and to clarify how that happens and why the police was not there to prevent it from happening. I never have been questioned about water. The city council never questioned me about risks of flooding, and are we prepared? We rely on technology, we rely on a good staff, and the council say, well, Mr. Mayor, we provide you with 50 million euros a year, do it, don't bother me. That's the way we deal with issues of water until it happens, I think that is the other side of it. Collaboration is really important. We receive delegations from Jakarta, I think 30 civil servants a year. It's a joint program that we have together to come to Rotterdam, to learn from the city capabilities, but also from the private companies. And they go to the most sophisticated water lab in the nation to learn how to deal with water. And I'm really honored and I feel filled with joy when I hear the governor saying that all this collaboration is rewarding, it's working, we are doing great things. I see that with Ho Chi Minh City. But let me say also a critical note. The World Bank is here among us. These are very important and costly infrastructure work. And I have seen our friends in Jakarta, but also in Ho Chi Minh City, how long it takes to get attention in the ears of the World Bank to listen to the needs of these cities in the world to provide suitable funding for these issues. Sometimes in developing countries, there's not enough money to fund such a wall. I think the projection in Jakarta was about billions of costs to prevent the city. So it's there exactly what I think that the World Bank and international funders maybe can collaborate to make things happen in very vulnerable areas in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The important thing is, as you mentioned, mindset. How can we change the mindset of people so that ultimately their behavior changes? But until you say many times, until the disaster strikes, it's difficult. But then, as the governor mentioned, if we wait and do not prepare, lives are lost. There's an economic loss. So we do really, it's the role of the political leaders to, in spite of the challenge, make the people aware and change their behavior. It's very interesting to know about the collaboration between the city of Rotterdam and Jakarta. Governor, would you like to tell us a bit more about the collaborations that are taking place?
Sure. If I may pick up from what Mayor of Rotterdam mentioned earlier, is on the issue of investment. In our cities, we're building infrastructure for increased productivity. And for that, we are able to secure funding quite easily for mobility, transportation infrastructures, bridges, and things like that. However, when it comes to securing the populations from disaster, as was mentioned earlier, it is often more challenging. And I think given the context of today, in which we have this climate change and that natural disasters is before us, and in the frequency that we never experienced before, like in our case in Jakarta, we had more rains than what we experienced in the past. And in the past, we have 2 seasons every year. One is the rainy season, one is dry season. Today, we have rainy season all year long, and sometimes dry season all year long. It's no longer predictable. Usually in the month of March, we're no longer experiencing rain. Just a few weeks ago, we have heavy rain coming into our city. Therefore, to pick up what Mayor Ahmed said earlier, it is very important nowadays to provide an econometric model to justify investment in the area of preventing a natural disaster. And if we don't have that model, it is always difficult to convince why we need to spend that much money on this kind of investment. For the infrastructures, the model is there, and we know because it increases our productivity. But this one is a risk that we can no longer tolerate, and I think that's one issue to pick up. The other aspect is on collaborations. I completely agree. We learn a lot from the experience of Rotterdam, and we have our team coming into Rotterdam on regular basis, and I think given the U20 framework, I think if we are able to pick up best practices from the member cities and create it like a clearinghouse of best practices in which we can send our team and we can host your team to come to our place and exchange experience, I think that would truly be a great one. And given the fact that we can no longer tackle the issue of climate change on ourselves, we need to do it together. These provide a good framework for that. I know C40 is doing that, and we do hope that, especially on the issue of resilience, this is something we need to pursue. Japan has experienced natural disasters that most of us don't experience, and you went through that process that you learn a lot, you pick up, and you're able to just translate that into this simple book. And by the way, I'll pick up this book too, and I'll share in our town. May not in the toilet, but this is so the point is lesson learned from this kind of meeting, that we need to have like clearinghouse of best practices, exchange of ideas, more at the practical level. So those are 2 points I would like to share in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The issue of investing in resilience, in prevention, is indeed not an easy one. But in the Sendai framework, one of the 7 targets is to increase international cooperation in the area of disaster risk reduction. The reality we are seeing is, as you have mentioned, because of climate change, the impact of disaster is so big that we are putting so much money into the relief and reconstruction. If you just see what happened in southern Africa, in Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe, cities have been wiped out, and there will be so much money that we need to put in there. So that one thing should be enough to sensitize ourselves that putting more money in prevention is indeed much better. Best practice, this is what we're doing right now. As a matter of fact, last week in Geneva, our organization held the global platform for disaster risk reduction, where lessons were learned. I wanted to, if I may, to ask Ms. Dalgil about, learn a bit more about what the communities are doing, because you emphasize so much the importance of getting the communities their wisdom and then connecting it with the experts' wisdom, and in that way that we can really make an inclusive disaster risk reduction policy. But can you enlighten us a bit more about what you're doing?
Thank you. Due to our experience, particularly in relation to the earthquakes, it was very clear that those communities that were already well connected and working together on different projects, so they had high levels of social capital, they recovered much more quickly than communities that weren't in that situation. And what we also learned, and this is universal too, that there will always be emergent leaders, that some people will simply emerge and they will take strong leadership positions, and because of who they are, they will lead others. And that's why I mentioned the Student Volunteer Army, which has become internationally known for the work that they have done. The individual, young man called Sam Johnson, he led this movement. His reason for starting it was because he approached the official civil defence and said, "Can I help?" And they said, "Are you trained as a volunteer?" And he said no, so they said, "No, thank you." And then he went to the Red Cross and asked them if he could volunteer, and they said, "Are you trained as a volunteer?" And he said, "No, thank you." So he went on Facebook, social media, a new way of communicating, and he said to his friend, he just sent it out saying, "Anyone who is not trained, that is the only condition. You come and help, and we'll gather together." And they formed this great group. I was living in the east of Christchurch at the time. I was a member of Parliament. I remember, thousands of students coming over to the east to dig all the silt out of the ground, out of our gardens and off the roads. They joined up with the farmers who came in from out of town with all the equipment. And together they formed a real bond and have been recognised throughout New Zealand for the work that they have done. They've been honoured for the work they did. But behind all of that, there were a number of communities that already had community gardens. So they were coming together to create something, a time bank. People may not know what a time bank is, but it is where community members register with particular skills, and one person will do something and get a credit in the time bank, and then somebody else will do something for them. But the value of the work is hour for hour, not dollar for dollar. So everyone is equal. That makes a strong, resilient community. So those are the communities that we need to encourage ways for community members to already get together and work together before disaster strikes. And if any disaster strikes, that's why I say that investing in communities, strong, connected communities who are able to participate in decision-making with local government, then they are in a they investing in that before disaster happens. It doesn't matter whether the disaster is man-made. It doesn't matter if it's a natural event. It doesn't matter if it's a slow-moving stress or a sudden shock or even something unexpected. Nobody would expect to have a terrorist attack in Christchurch, but there is no question that as a city, our response was much stronger because of the experience that we'd already been through in other disasters.
That's a wonderful story. It shows that how people can be empowered or empower themselves and become the agent of change. Because having been turned down twice, now he said, okay, I'm going to train non-trained people. So I think it connects to what the governor of Tokyo was mentioning at the beginning of how communities help each other and how individuals ultimately need to help themselves. And I think there were a lot of, many of you pointed out to the importance of inclusivity, leaving no one behind. And it is now a truth that we should involve those who are vulnerable to be actually active in disaster risk reduction policies, be it women, be it elderly, be it people with disability, and have their voices heard and have their voices be put into policies. That is very important. And if we do that, we have a very inclusive policy indeed. Now, I would be happy to see if there are any more comments on any of the issues that we have been talking about here. We also talked about infrastructure, aging. That is a big issue in many of your cities. And again, we did see that flooding might be one issue that is a common challenge in all cities. And I know through my job that in developing cities too, flooding is a big issue now. So would any of the distinguished leaders would like to mention anything around these issues or anything else at all? Yes, thank you.
Just allow me to go back to the remark of Mr. Beswadan when it comes to the need for clearinghouse for information about those issues. My expectation is that the Global Center on Adaptation that will be built in Rotterdam for big deal, Madam Koike, financed by Japan, will serve as the clearinghouse for that type of experiences and information. Mr. Ban Ki-moon is the chair of that institute. We expect them, we provided them nowadays with office space, but we're going to build, as a matter of fact, a floating office for Mr. Ban Ki-moon and his staff in Rotterdam. I'm expecting that to be the center for, and thank you for Japan for financing that institute. The issue of aging is very prominent in my port. And the question that we have is, can we learn from the experiences in the airplane industry, where there is a systematic, periodic check on the systems of aircrafts. As a matter of fact, after 20 years of time, rather nothing in the airplane is what it was there when it has been constructed 20 years ago. Everything has been changed. And the question is, do we have the same methodology of inspecting our infrastructure the way it happened as secure and precise in the aircraft industry? That happens with refineries, for instance, or petrochemical sites. Maybe not a big issue in Tokyo, but in Osaka and other places in Japan. Do we have a system for that? I dare to say we don't have that. We carry out inspections We give a lot of responsibility to the private sector to deal with that, and our role as government is on a distance and see whether they fulfill the requirements within the law or local legislations. But we don't have a very secure system of inspections of installations, government installations, but also installations of the private sector. So there may be another focus for the future to see how we can we deal with that, and how to raise the awareness of our inspections. In the past, we had in the Netherlands what I call negotiations inspections. So the inspectors are coming in, your factory is missing on the list 5 points, then you get a letter from the inspections, you are required to fix that within 3 months. And if you don't do that, we come back and then try to push you and again and again and again. Why? Because closing such installations can mean firing 1,000 people. And you don't know it. In my experience as mayor, I did that once. That I said to a company, after a warning and a warning and a warning, you have to close. And it had to do with the infrastructure of dealing with fires of that installations. Old systems, not robust anymore, and very vulnerable. And it was not a small player, it was a big player in the port, a storage facility. So I told him, you have to close. I had to play power again, because I was not the authority who gave him the permission to operate. It was the province. In other countries, you may say the county or the state. And then he said to me, well, Mr. Mayor, I listened to you, but I'm not again do what you're asking me to do. So I had no other option than telling him, but if you don't close tonight, so that was really an issue of ours, I will give a press conference and withdraw my trust in you. And that is the nuclear option. The moment a mayor or governor withdraws his trust from a private company, then nobody else would like to collaborate with you. And that's the business of oil. So dealing with inspections and dealing with a very precise way of tackling risks connected with aging of installations is a very new science to us as mayors and governors. And to me, the best example is the airplane industry.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful example, and I can understand the difficulty you had when going in there. But yes, we talk about the governance of disaster risk reduction, which means that we have to put in rules and regulations, but that's not enough. Then inspections have to be done. Yes?
I forgot to tell you that he closed the installation, and then it took him 2 years to fix the whole business, and nowadays is one of the best operating systems in the port. So it takes 2 years and 150 million of investments.
So yes, he did, and you implemented the inspection result. So that was very pertinent. Governor Koike?
Yes. If I may, I'd like to talk about the difference of earthquake and flooding, and it's the matter of how important to deliver accurate information before and after those disasters. As for earthquakes, it's unfortunate, but it happened all of a sudden without any notice and warning sometimes. Well, maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes in advance we can know, but a day before or 2 days before, it is very, very difficult to know when the real huge earthquake will take place. And so the preparedness for the earthquake in advance is really important, but it's very hard to know when it happens. And as for flooding, compared to the earthquake, we can know in advance a day, or weather forecast tells us something, so we can make ourselves be ready. And I would like to show you this Tokyo My Timeline kit. This will be provided to our citizens, especially children. Almost 1 million kits will be delivered to those kids. And this is to prepare for the flooding. And if you know the flood is coming in 2 hours before, 2 hours or 1 hour before, then you can put how to prepare. Oh yes, this is the kit is not in English, but this is an example, only example in English, so that you can know. And by using sort of anime seal, children can enjoy just like a game to know or to make ready when the flood comes what they should do. So this is a sort of device or tool for the education, disasters, lessons for the disaster, to prepare for the disaster. And educating children means educating their parents. So we can prepare for the flooding to make sure that people should be prepared for, and how to evacuate wherever you are located. You can evacuate from the place you are there. Now, talking about providing accurate information is really important from the point of administration or the government. And after when the disaster, whatever the earthquake or flooding, we have to think that the electricity or gas service and many other ordinary infrastructure service will stop. So you are using the smartphones and using those wireless IoT things, but this may not work at all during the disaster. So thinking about the cash without cash. Yeah, I mean, cashless economy is now prevailing the world, but maybe it will not work during the disaster time. And those mobile phone may not work. So sometimes the obsolete analog type will work. So we have to have a double preparedness for the high-tech and the low analog type for the time of disaster. Well, it's very costly, but in order to save the people and the city, it works. Thank you.
The best communication system still is the radio. So that's why we distribute in Rotterdam radio, and we ask people to have either batteries home, or we also distribute radios that work with a kind of very old inductor system, that you may create your own electricity on it. And within the law, the mayor is responsible for disaster management. They have the authority to take a share of the public radio to communicate directly with citizens. So in my policy room, there is a designated space where there is a microphone and a red key. So if necessary, I can take the radio over and talk from the policy center immediately to the citizens, not only the city, but also in the entire region. That's the best way to communicate with citizens. And the other one is for the emergency services. Indeed, this type of instruments will not work. That's why we have also satellites, telecommunication systems for vital institutions to deal with emergency services. And I have also one of them. And finally, we may also use the system of the police, sending police cars into the streets, communicating a statement from the city government. So the police cars, they have, of course, the audio systems in the car, so you may use also that type of systems to communicate. We rely heavily on this type of products, but it may not work indeed when it comes to a disaster. So radio is a better thing. Police cars and interventions from the authorities on the public radio. I'm not talking about to be interviewed, no, just like this. So I might talk with my citizens immediately and give them the instructions what to do.
Thank you very much. The importance of making available toolkits which are accessible and also almost entertaining is important. And then the importance of communication. So we only have 5 more minutes for this discussion. If there is anyone at all who wants to have the last words, please, you are most welcome. Please,
I don't want to take the last word, but just quickly, just a couple of things on lifelines. The radio is part of the lifeline, so I just wanted to support what was said before. It's essential as a communication tool. People need to understand they need battery radios, battery-powered radios, so that's falling back on the old technologies of the past. And it is true, these don't stay online without the electricity to support them. The idea of looking to see where the vulnerabilities lie in the infrastructure is really important. So we were very lucky that a Lifelines report had been done in our city, in our region actually beforehand, and a lot of work had gone into investing in resilience of the infrastructure. And a $6 million investment by the lines company, the electricity company, actually saved $60 million worth of asset and meant that the power was only off for 3 weeks and not for over 3 months, because that would have been the difference. So investing in the infrastructure that is vulnerable in a particular disaster is really important. And the last thing I just wanted to throw on the table, and it's not something necessarily for today, but there is the issue around risk transfer, which is where insurance comes in. And it certainly was mentioned in Sendai, and it's in the consideration of it. And I think when we're thinking about rebuilding after a disaster happens, then we do need to think about the betterment, because it is an opportunity to build back better than it was before, and actually to invest in future-proofing infrastructure at the same time. I'd like to think that we've done quite a bit of that, but we probably would have liked to have been in a position to do even more. And I know that I visited Brisbane recently, and the Queensland Reconstruction Authority that was set up in response to the flooding there, they've actually been now turned into a permanent organisation for the state. So the Queensland Reconstruction Authority still exists today, and it has been given multiple millions of dollars worth of funding in order for betterment, solely for betterment, and that is actually preparing for future disasters and recognising that they are going to remain vulnerable to flooding, and therefore they need to invest in actually the prevention beforehand. So it really backs up, I think, what everyone else has said.
Any more final words? Yes? No? Okay, then I'd like to close by reminding us of the 4 priorities of the Sendai Framework, because all the brilliant interventions touch on 1 or 2 of the priorities. So the first priority is to understand the risk we are facing. And the second one is to strengthen governance. And the third one is to invest in resilience. And the fourth one is to build back better. And I think that is what we are all talking about. And finally, I must say that disaster risk reduction needs political leadership, because this is about prevention. If you prevent well, people will never know what has been done. You need a very strong political leader with a vision to do this. So with that, I would like to close this session by thanking once again all our brilliant presentators and congratulate the Governor of Tokyo for convening this wonderful session. So I would like to close this session, and there will be some time to a break. We will reconvene at this room, I understand, at 5:15. Okay, so we're going to first do a photo session, and then we will break, and then reconvene at 5:15 to have the final session of the day to adopt the Tokyo Declaration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're now moving on to the photo session. Please wait for a few minutes until it's ready. Those who are the press, please come forward. プレスの方はどうぞ前へお進みください。フォトセッションの準備をお願いいたします。Please be closer to each other. Look at the camera in the center. Thank you very much.